Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another art stream with myself, Pharaoh, alongside co-hosts Alexander Adams, artist, and Panama Hat. Alex, how are you doing?
Not too bad. Diversity is our strength, comrade.
Exactly. I mean, you were just mentioning you're in the heart of some of the recent protests. So being on the real bleeding edge of that.
Sorry, we were mentioning off stream the Bristol riots. So I've been watching the destruction of Western civilization from the West Country.
Who'd have thought?
Yeah.
And Panama Hat, hot off the the right wing's hottest stream on Friday night.
Oh dear me. Yes, hot off that. Becoming more and more infamous each day with certain types.
The nemesis of all nationalists, apparently.
Apparently so. Not exactly. Didn't go quite according to plan. Much more prefer these cozy art streams to anything quite as vociferous as what happened last night.
Well, and I think tonight we're planning something nice and relaxed. So hopefully a little bit easier on you. On the debating skills, I think. But obviously, it was a little while since we had the kind of last stream and catch up. So I thought I'd just do a little bit of a recap of kind of everything we've looked at. So remember, this stream series is all about Symbolists, a very loose group of artists spanning decades, but basically originating in France and kind of shooting out across the rest of the world. And we've looked in detail at most of the French, Belgian, English schools. And so tonight what I thought we'd do is to do a bit of a, what happens at the end of the symbolist movement. And part of that end is about, as with all ideas, it kind of has this kind of starting point where it kind of fires out like a shockwave across the rest of the world. And what's interesting about the Symbolists is they have this kind of impact in Eastern European countries, specifically Poland and Russia, that's quite powerful and is definitely worth bringing up. So some pretty niche names, but hopefully it'll be relatively interesting for those who've enjoyed the previous streams. And we're also going to be touching, I guess, kind of symbolism going into modernism as well. Alex is going to take us through some Munch, and would you count them as a pure symbolist, or again one of those kind of figures spanning both areas?
I would say, well, he's seen as a bridge between the Symbolists and the Expressionists. So he's not quite either. He's also sort of 1 foot in the post-impressionist camp as well. So he's considered a bit of a hybrid.
Interesting, yeah. So this is really kind of like wrapping up the last parts of symbolism, and hopefully by the end of the stream we'll kind of have hit the end. And so if you guys wouldn't mind, I thought I'd kind of kick us off.
Before we kick off, I've got a couple of corrections to do. Yeah, sorry.
Please do,
So I always like to highlight my incompetence by going back over the last stream and remembering things that I did wrong. So I mentioned that Baudelaire wrote The Painter of Modern Life, and he mentioned an artist in that who was rather undistinguished, and I called him Forain. It wasn't Forain. It was a different artist. It was Constantin Guise, who's actually stylistically very close to Forain, but obviously a different person, so I got that wrong. Also, Pharaoh quite preemptively sort of rushed me into launching a book which has now been postponed. So I have to go back and say, don't order the book that Pharaoh suggested that I introduce, because it's not available yet. So I hold Pharaoh morally, legally, and financially responsible for jinxing that book.
I'm just building up the hype that people will be clamoring on the doors of the publishers to get access to it, but you're gonna have to hold on to it onto that, I thought, are a little bit longer, aren't you? So
yes, so I'm not going to mention that book at all until it is actually published and available. But in the meantime, you can buy 2 books by me called Culture War, or also Iconoclasm. 2 books that are available now.
wonderful. Okay, let's get cracking then. So the first chap that I was hoping for us to take a look at is a. Let me just share my screen a second. Can you guys see this?
Wow.
Yes.
Is a chap called. Okay, now I just want to apologise now because obviously this is the kind of some Slavs. What should
Russian name.
What should I destroy their names? This is Jacek Malszewski.
I'll also apologize now because I know I'm going to mess these up horribly.
There you go. Malczewski.
Is it Malszewski? I don't know. Possibly.
There we go.
Ironically, I think we may actually have some Polish viewers. So for once, there may be people who can actually correct you in the chat.
They all leave some very angry comments.
Yes,
exactly. Mad Poles. Okay, so just why I wanted to bring him up was that I actually discovered him through a trip I did down to Krakow, and they've got one of his paintings inside the National Art Gallery, and then I bought a kind of a book of an exhibition that the Barbican did in the 70s, interestingly. And again, there's a relatively little known artist, but some really fascinating and interesting themes and symbolic elements at the same time. So just as a little bit of background to who he is and what's he about. He comes from a middle class family from Poland. But with upper class origins. Now, what you need to remember is that he is living during the time of the partition of Poland. So, during the life of his character, of his person, Poland doesn't exist, but the kind of struggle for Polish identity and what is it to be Polish when you don't have a country, kind of flows through him. Another interesting aspect, although not that unsurprising when you talk about the Polish, is his deeply religious background. And I quite liked how the curator of this Barbican exhibition mentioned he's almost got this kind of mystical faith. And, something we sort of alluded to before was this kind of vein of mystical Catholic artists in the kind of Belgian and French symbolist schools. Malszewski it definitely comes out of that kind of vein, but also kind of fused together with a little bit of naturalism. And there was a great line describing his life that he became ecstatic at the sight of an autumn landscape. And again, I just love that idea, and I feel like that's an aspiration for all of us listening now to be ecstatic at the beauty of nature, which I thought was quite cool. Just in terms of what's going on in Poland, so we're talking kind of 1870s to 1900s, like I said. Poland doesn't exist, but there are like a series of important moments, such as the kind of Young Poland movement, which is all about trying to, these young Polish people trying to maintain that identity through that struggle, and also the kind of uprising of 1863, which is a failed uprising against the Russians. In terms of art that's being created, interestingly, the Polish have got a strong background in what I would describe as kind of history painting. There's quite a famous painting of Nero lighting Christians, using them as candlesticks. Have you guys seen that? That's a
no, I haven't seen that.
Okay, maybe I'll have to quickly Google that on a second. Are
we going to have to put an age restriction on this video?
Yeah, maybe. Well, always. Here we go. It's this one here. It's literally giving me candlesticks. That's not.
Thanks
again. Let's Google again. Nero's torches. There you go. So it's this kind of. I would describe this as kind of like the kind of stuff that's going on in Poland. Have you guys seen this before?
No.
No, I haven't seen this.
No, it's pretty amazing. So you've kind of got I think Nero's at the top here, just kind of being sulky. They get his Ethiopian slaves at the front, and then you've got kind of Christians being lit up there. It is. But what's interesting is there is this kind of large vein of what I describe as like historical paintings. They're very large format, lots of characters, very dynamic, lots of military scenes at the same time. So he's coming out of that tradition, and also Polish Romanticism as well, which hits again like 50 years later than everyone else. So sorry.
Yeah, so that reminds me very much of like the Orientalist paintings of Gérôme. Also, you had Gérôme did a famous scene of gladiators. The one where it's the emperor is sort of I think he's about to decide whether or not he's going to raise or lower his thumb.
Yeah,
it's quite a famous one. So that seems very close to Orientalist painting as well as I suppose sort of like Alma Tadema and sort of the late sort of aesthetics painters from Britain and Germany in sort of like 1880, 1890s.
No, exactly. No, definitely is. It's got that kind of similar feel to it. So it's interesting already. I think if you go between the two and this kind of one, and just in terms of the characters and the composition and stuff, there is that kind of slight similarity. Now, again, interestingly, he studied at the Krakow School of Arts, but then did spend some time in Paris as well in the 1870s. So, and that's where he kind of came into contact with the French symbolist movement, and moved back to Poland, and then kind of kick-started his career. And he's kind of painting relatively late, between 1890 and 1910. Like I said, there's just this like 20-year lag in the East compared to kind of the West. But I really love this one. This is one of his earlier pieces called Melancholia, 1890. It was kind of done. So what I liked, already this kind of was almost future. There's some futurism elements to it, even before futurism exists. But this is all about the ideas of melancholia. So I'm sure everyone's familiar with Dürer's etching of the kind of angel who's kind of slumped. Mm-hmm. And all kind of symbolic objects around. Maljuski is kind of taking that idea and applying it to himself. Now, one thing I would say is he is probably one of the most narcissistic painters I've ever encountered. In the fact
and that's saying something.
He is literally in like 95% of the paintings that he creates. Mm-hmm. And there's even worse than that, and we'll see that.
Well, you know what? He actually reminds me a bit of Salvador Dali. So you've got like the Battle of Tetuan, which was painted by Salvador Dali in the 1960s, where he's got like Arabs on horseback rushing towards the viewer, and they're sort of flying and floating, and it's very much like this. So it's really interesting that they had the same sort of narcissistic outlook, because Dali is obviously very narcissistic as well.
It's interesting how that's I wonder how much of those kind of personality traits come through in the paintings. I guess quite a lot. Now, just in terms of what the painting represents, again, he Malczewski never wrote down what he said, but I mean, you can see here we can start off on the kind of left hand side. You got the painter kind of slumped down at his empty canvas, and we don't know if he's kind of thinking, if he started his work. Maybe he's he could be sketching at the bottom of the painting, or he could be asleep. So it's almost got this dreamlike quality. And then we've got, I guess you could say, this kind of dynamic group of people, starting off with children across here on the left hand side, moving across to kind of middle age in the center, and then you've got gold. You got the kind of old age here at the end. So it's the kind of three stages of man. The woman on the right hand side is often associated with Polonia, who I don't know if you're familiar with her, but is kind of like a representation of Poland itself, kind of like
Britannia.
Yes, exactly. And you can obviously see these are troops of the various uprisings here. Now, here's an interesting little fact for you. I don't know if you can see these spears here, but as part of
halberds, I would say.
Well, interestingly, as part of the kind of Polish uprising movement, a lot of the farmers would literally convert their scythes into spears, and so it's kind of like it's a symbolic weapon. This idea of the scythe on a spear, and you'll see it a lot in kind of Polish.
Yes,
work.
the war scythe is actually something it's an actual weapon. You can't actually use scythes themselves as weapons because the blades are particularly thin, and it's easy to get them bent. So the first strike you would bend them. But war scythes are actually symbolically designed to represent the scythe, but they are actually like equivalent to halberds. But so these are war scythes. That's right.
That's some great warside knowledge there.
Sorry, I've been watching Lindy Beige. So
there you go.
That's
exactly
where it comes from.
Always watch Lindy Beige.
Oh yes.
But I just quite like you've obviously kind of got this composition which is almost triangular because you've got all of this action spilling out. It's kind of comes out at you. There's the symbology of the different. There's just so much going on. So many stories that we don't understand or know about.
There's a lot of youth in the painting, I noticed.
Well, again, it's all to do with this kind of young Poland movement. A lot of the revolutionaries were kind of young men, creating a vanguard against the Russians. So again, Poland was basically like 2/3 of it was occupied by the Russians, and a third was the Austrians, and a sixth Austrians, a sixth the Prussians. And so, you can see this kind of the group of young men with the Polish revolutionary flag, and they're kind of literally ripping their shirts apart, offering up their chests to an imagined enemy. But there's just so many little scenes and vignettes here. Someone desperately clinging onto a cross as they fall. This mysterious fiddler floating in space, almost looking at you. It's something you could definitely spend, an entire day unpacking. It's interesting as well because obviously you've kind of got like birth to death. So Polonia is almost representing death as well, and all of these uprisings were failed. So it's kind of like the revolution led to death and failure as well. So there's that kind of thoughts to it. And also the idea of melancholia, maybe the painter is sad that even, like all of this youth died for nothing, basically, so. Cool. So yeah, that's the first piece, and this basically kind of got him on the map. He became exceedingly popular in Polish circles, and I think he did. He got a few awards in Paris as well for his works, but relatively small medals. So this second piece is called Thanatos 1, and this is all to do with the twin brother of Hypnos. So this is kind of a Greek classical figure, and the figure itself was always described as kind of androgynous, but obviously you've kind of got this kind of like relatively womanly hips here, but you can see on the face that's quite quite mannish, and kind of one of the calling cards of Marzulski is again these kind of like women, like angelic women and older men, and also kind of like time and the scythe as well. Again, so in this case here we've got a kind of representation of maybe the angel of death. Although I don't know if you can see here, there's like two sets of wings. So again, there's kind of Christian symbolism here around the seraph who has multiple sets of wings. The wings themselves contain like these faces on, which could be moons. And you can see it's kind of like it looks like it's nighttime, and then the kind of area is sort of lit by a very bright moon, almost too bright. And again, there's the questions as to who this chap is across here. It's almost like he's been called out of his house to death. He's preparing the scythe to reap the death. You've kind of got the hounds looking on at their master as he's going out. But again, very very interesting piece. But again, it's like he does relatively realist paintings, but again with these kind of deep symbolist undertones at the same time. Okay, the next one is slightly further on. So debatable whether he's put himself in here again, but I'm going to say that it's him as the old guy in that
Couldn't help himself.
Yeah, and Małżeński is here right in the centre of this painting, and this is called the year 1905. So again, I think you need to have a very strong knowledge of Polish history if you need to interpret his paintings. But the year 1905 is the failed revolution in Russia, and obviously in kind of Russian occupied territories. There was a Polish uprising again in 1905 by kind of some kind of Polish troops. And what we can see here is again. Zizek sort of representing Poland here, trying to walk down a path. You've kind of got Polonia in the background, the muse, alongside Pegasus, and he's kind of pulling them along. And he's been blocked by these two, insidious harpies. And I don't know if you can see on the sides here. There's two little snippets of nature. And on the right hand side, we've got the Tara Mountains. I think it's meant to be Tatra Mountains.
Tatra Mountains, yeah.
Yeah, representing Austria, and you've got the kind of flat Baltic coast of Prussia. And so, what this is representing is Poland trying to make its way, trying to travel across to freedom, and of course the Polish uprisings during 1905 were crushed by the twin harridans of Prussia and Austria here. So they're physically blocking his way. So again, there's kind of lots of symbolic meaning. I mean, you can obviously tell they're no good because of their kind of serpented breasts and their Amazonian height as well. That's
yeah.
But again, there's lots of little details and intricacies in there. Like, I don't know why you put Pegasus in there. Maybe it's kind of like account. The harpies aren't typically winged, so it's kind of maybe like a good winged creature versus the evil winged. He's also holding maybe a skull or maybe a head in his hand, and we don't know what that is as well. But you can see that he's kind of looking down and away. So there's this sadness and again melancholy to.
There's a sense of failure to him, I think, and the two harpies look kind of quite triumphant, or perhaps sort of mocking of the figure there. So and given that this is based on a revolution which failed, at least from the Polish point of view, then I think that would make sense.
No, I like that. They're almost kind of like smug bouncers. they don't even have to raise their hands. Just their size alone compared to the diminutive Pole, manlet Pole, BTFO'd by.
Poor fellow. Yeah.
But no, I thought it was quite a lovely painting. And then the last of the four for Małżeński is what's called Prophecy. This is done in the 1919, and this is based on a passage from the Old Testament, based on the prophecies of Ezekiel. And I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with the prophecies of Ezekiel, but he has quite a famous.
Remind me.
He's got quite a famous passage about the valley of the dry bones, and he could have described seeing this valley of skeletal forms on the ground, and then all of a sudden God appears and then knits flesh around the bones, and they come back to life again. And it's obviously a prophecy of the resurrection, the return of Christ, etc. But what we can see here is again Zizek right at the center. He's obviously been kind of clasped by Christ. But he obviously was a skeleton previously, and now he's been brought to life again. And you can sort of see how, like, his clothes here. I mean, that's a very low-waisted trousers, but I think it's meant to give the impression that he's sort of been pulled back together to life again.
Yeah.
And the clothes are literally kind of being pulled up on his body. You can see his coat across here, and he's been brought back to life again. And obviously you can see the valley of bones all the way around. I love, again, if you look at Christ, I mean, pretty similar to
yes.
that's what I was saying about the kind of the kind of egotism of him.
And I presume the eye of God in the background behind Christ.
Exactly. So this kind of how do you represent the the unformable God or whatever? You represent him as a gigantic eye in a triangle.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's meant to be God the Father. Although, I mean, you can see here there is this kind of dark moon thing here, so I wonder if it's the Trinity at the top.
Perhaps
it could be.
I mean, quite a politically charged piece for 1919, given what was happening at the time. You did say 1919.
Yeah, that's right. So
but this is the point where they gained independence, didn't they? 1919.
That would have, Poland would have been independent by then, about a year in, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he started working on it before 19 or it was finished by then. So apologies. Right. One thing to mention is there is a form of Polish Romanticism called Polish Romantic Messianism, which is all about becoming an almost messianic figure in the group. And again, there is something about the pose across here where he is trying to, like, I don't know, like a almost heroic figure. I mean, look at the flourish in the hand. And something about the staff as well. There is this kind of powerfulness and this attempt to become from nothing into something. But that's actually, like, I guess there's a very strong analogy for Poland coming out from total death to life again. Yeah, so that's a really good point. So yes, that is Malczewski, and thank goodness I don't have to say his name ever again, hopefully. But Alex, I don't know if we want to switch across to Jean Delville or Delville.
Delville, yes. Well, I mean, it's not that I have a great deal specific to say about him. I think he's just very interesting as a type. So Jean Delville was one of my fabulous Belgians. He was 1867 to 1953. Can you imagine living to 1953 and painting this sort of stuff? This is sort of almost 50 years after the advent of Cubism. But it's something. It's a very curious thing that when an artist becomes mature, just before the advent of high modernism, suddenly they have this sort of weird afterlife, in that you find sort of impressionists and post-impressionists and symbolists living on until like the 1950s, and you think, well, what do they make of the world around them? So this is just an example of him as an idealist painter. So I remember at the beginning we talked about symbolism being very baggy. It has so many different strands. It's got a sort of licentious strand. It's got a nationalist strand. It's got a personal strand. It's got a religious strand, and here it's got a sort of like a quasi-religious spiritual aspect to it. So I thought this was just a good example of. So this is a painting I think called. Is this Soul Love from 1900?
It is Soul Love, yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like an album from 1970.
So I've put a few others in here, and this is another quite famous one. I don't know if you know much about this at all.
Tell us.
Yeah, this is I think it's called like Satan's Gift. Or Satan's Trail. Sorry, I didn't write down the name for it here. But I think what's interesting about Delville is that he has this kind of quite like harrowing sensuality to his work. So, you can like again something like Soul Love that's pretty racy, isn't it? For
a little bit, yeah.
For the 19th century or whatever. But again, it's not. I don't know. I wouldn't describe it as an erotic painting necessarily. I think it's sensual, but it's like compared to like someone like Rops or something like that. There isn't that kind of like I don't know, rank eroticism. There is like it's brought to a more transcendent level.
Yeah,
and I think there is something similar here about this painting here, and this is kind of Satan and sort of walking along, and this kind of path of bodies that he's leaving behind, which is kind of like you've got this almost orgiastic following, but there is a kind of darkness to the painting. I like the character of Satan himself. He's kind of bent over. I mean, his form isn't great. I mean, just you can see how like wide his shoulders are. But again, I sort of like it because it gives him this kind of like otherworldly kind of character. You can see that his wings, his beautiful wings, have been malformed into these almost, that's almost like an octopus tentacle at the bottom here, and going across. And you can see his morning star with his bright orange hair, thus confirming that all gingers are satanic.
And also he's Lucifer, because I remember that Lucifer means light bringer.
Yes, exactly. So again, everything is brightly alight, and you can see. Sorry.
Well, what year did you say this was painted? Sorry.
I think it's before. I think it's like 1890, maybe. I think it's before Self-Love.
Right.
And you can see here he's almost sort of forming this. I don't know what we want to call this. This kind of snail trail of. It could be what could be dead bodies. It could be, like asleep bodies. But there's something sinister about it. And, it's almost like he's summoning up, these souls of the corrupt and the damned, basically, to kind of follow him into this hellscape. And that's if you kind of look and see where he is, you can see the kind of this dark sky. And kind of, I think that's kind of like animals floating around. There's something a little bit Boschian about it. You can see this little creature down here, almost like reptilian. It could almost be under the water. Actually, I'm thinking now as well.
And remember, he's working in Brussels, and Brussels has at least one good Bosch painting. So he would have been familiar with that.
Interesting, yeah. Like I think certainly the kind of that kind of dark and it's almost kind of grotesque.
It's almost
background.
It's almost like he sort of forged these people. I mean, I would take that approach because it appeals to me because of my very, very anti-humanist view of mankind, I suppose. I mean, that's I haven't seen this before, but I have to say I'm quite sort of captured by it. Because it's sort of satanic without being satanist, if you see what I mean. It's
without celebrating it. Yeah.
Yes.
It has that kind of like initial like I guess you call it kind of sexy glamorous veneer. Look at all these live bodies lying around. There is that kind of like skin deep beauty. But then you see again this kind of horrific half man at the top summoning them, and also, like I said, there is a darkness to them. I mean, this woman here, she's almost got her hand out trying to be free. It's almost like she's in some kind of like opiate stupor or something like that.
Yeah.
So
they don't
they're
appear to be in pain. They will appear to be quite comfortable. That's the.
Or are they dead?
It's like what you get in the Rossetti paintings, where you have like the muse who's sort of swooning between half orgiastic and then half on the point of death.
Mm-hmm.
And that when there was the famous one that I can't remember the title of, where the model, his famous model, is holding a poppy, and this
Siddle?
sort of symbolizes the dream of opium.
Is it Siddle? Elizabeth Siddle?
Yes, that's it. Yes, that's right.
And you've also got like a few kind of symbolic things as well here. I always thought this looks a little bit like the gaping maw. So you can see the mouth with the teeth and then an eye, but maybe I'm just seeing too much. I've been staring at the paintings a little bit too much. And then we've got a few others here. This is meant to be Jesus and the Apostles. I mean, I would describe it as John Dee and his group of followers.
His simps, you mean?
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yes. John Dee and his simps, right there. Exactly.
1894. This was when he was a young man.
Yes. But obviously, you kind of got this is very much like some of the kind of other kind of French stuff we saw, just in terms of the format. Again, this kind of long laid out. You got Jesus in a garden. There is the albino peacock across here. It could, with the kind of shading and the colouring, it could be nighttime. But you've got these kind of classical figures, the kind of ridiculous contrapposto, but there is a certain fairness, should we say, to some of the characters here. I mean, it
borders on the satirical,
yes,
almost,
But I thought it was an interesting take on the 12 disciples. Again, I just love some of the kind of like muscle. Like he looks like he could be in thoughts, but it's just like some kind of like, it's all about showing off the the muscle groupings, etc. But
do you know of any of the general reaction to this painting?
Not really. Like I would say that Delville was very popular, and
he received a lot of public commissions, so this was the sort of thing that he was painting for public buildings, and I think this was where most of his work came from. I don't think quite there was always this much nudity, but it was always this sort of grand, quite polished, sort of relatively flat, sort of frieze-like compositions.
I see.
Yeah, I would say his work is very sensuous, and again, it's not just male nudity as well. Like he does a lot of female as well. And then this last one is so this is actually was a fresco for the the courts of justice, and this is a figure of justice, and it's one of my favourite Delville's works here. You can see this kind of ridiculous. This is the most like over the top ridiculous justice of all time, and this was a
Giga
yeah, it is literally Giga Chad, just like with you can see here you've kind of got the I don't know, prisoner or culprit here. He's manacled, being used as a footstool for justice with his gigantic double-handed sword. And
that looks just like a Watts painting, doesn't it? Really,
it is
actually exaggeration.
Yeah, certainly, and again the small number of characters and the kind of focus all about the centre. Sadly, the Royal Courts of Justice the Palace of Justice that this was made for got bombed during the Second World War, so this is no longer with us. So this was the value sketch, and you can see the little squares here that he would take and use to transfer it to the fresco.
I see.
But you've obviously got justice here, but you've also got these kind of two shadowy figures as well. And you can see here this kind of like pointing down, which could represent, this figure needs to die. And also Justice's throne is almost like an executioner's block, if you can see.
It really is. Yeah, very plain.
The blood from his previous inhabitants, let's just say. So
I have to say, I much prefer this to the female interpretation of justice. I think there's something a lot. This is much more in line with what I think about capital punishment and the idea of what sort of a society handing out justice actually is. I would say much prefer this interpretation.
Yeah, and I guess I'm sure everyone knows, but the kind of the female version typically is blindfolded. She's holding the sword of justice. She's got the weighing scale. So the blind is meant to be that she's not biased. The sword of justice represents justice, and then
interpretation.
The weighing scales is weighing up the options here. But I do just love. He's kind of like this is justice as like fiendish executor. I love this. He's almost got a smile on his face. It's almost like a sadistic. He's just happy, just doling out the justice. But no, it's quite rare to have that male representation, isn't it? I think so. Yeah, quite charming. Okay, so that's the Delville. I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to talk about with that, Alex.
No, just that he was particularly popular, and he's a good example of the idealist, or the sort of the quasi spiritual side of symbolism. Also, very tied to civic values, and obviously sort of working in a civic arena.
Well, am I right in thinking he was one of this the Catholic French, like Catholic group of artists as well? Is that right, Oral?
I think he was. He was also involved in Theosophism, which is a big subject that I don't really know enough to talk about. But yeah, so he was quite involved in sort of quite elaborate, involved interpretations of his own work, and also about the importance of spirituality in art. Yeah, so that's why I chose him.
Well, what's Theosophism? Sorry.
Well, it's basically divining connections between various religions, and saying that basically all of these disparate religions actually come from one origin, and they share a common set of values and personae and so forth, sort of archetypes, sort of Jungian archetypes and so forth. And it was particularly popular at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. It's quite involved in it became very popular among artists who wanted to be spiritual, but without being specifically religious, without tying themselves to a particular doctrine. So you find this quite closely tied to artists like Mondrian, for example, and the development of abstraction, and Hilma af Klint, who was a Swedish artist who was basically unknown until many years after her death, and she was one of the pioneers of abstract art. So that's basically how it relates to art.
Interesting. Yeah, like I think a lot of symbolism has that kind of spiritual element, even though it's not necessarily Christian in nature, and it sort of powers a lot of the understanding and thought behind it. Shall I go and talk about my first Russian and then Panama?
Yes, yeah, I think that's much better than Monk goes very well at the end, I think.
Okay. Okay, so and then maybe Panama, if you want to chime in with some Russian literature whenever. But going on to the Russians now, obviously during the kind of symbolist period, Russia was still under the Tsars, the imperial family, and this kind of time period is often described as the Russian Silver Age. I don't know why it was never called the Golden Age. I'm sure someone will say, but I really believe from the kind of 1870s to 1900 is a real brilliant period in Russian culture. There's a real strong like new identity kind of brewing. Loads of cathedrals and churches are being built, so it's very, very spiritual at the same time, but it's also culturally some of the best classical work is being created musically, and also artistically. You've got the Imperial Academy, which is churning out top quality artists on an international level. Now, that being said, the Russians were always behind the rest of Europe, but obviously they had strong connections to places such as France, and French culture and influence has been tied to Russia since Peter the Great and Catherine the Great as well. So it's no surprise to hear when we think about symbolism kind of originating from the French that it's sort of rubbed up on the Russians. But I would say that all of the kind of Russian symbolism has a very Christian background. Like everyone we're going to talk about has got backgrounds in painting for cathedrals, in iconic painting, which again was still a very important part of Russian society and Russian culture then, and it's obviously been revised today. And the first painter we're going to look at is Kuznetsov. Now, just in terms of again what's happening in terms of the like other paintings that are out there, there's some strong emphasis on realism coming from the kind of French realism, and depictions of the peasant and the peasant landscape. There's lots of historical works, and there's a little bit of romanticism at the same time, although less than in Poland. And Kuznetsov, he's really more of like a history painter, but he does have these kind of moments where he kind of indulges in symbolist fancies, and this is one of my favorite of his works. And we can see here the four riders of the apocalypse, taken straight from Revelation. So this is kind of like a 3-layered painting.
Mm-hmm.
Now you got to remember that Kuznetsov, he started out from an iconic tradition. His father was an icon painter. He got his first bit of work. I'm not sure if he was as part of a seminary, but he definitely studied alongside Orthodox monks to learn his kind of skills, and then went on to do fresco work and icon painting before training in Moscow, and he also spent some time in Paris as well. But this has already got this kind of dramatic, large scale, iconic feel to it in terms of layout. There's this sort of 3 levels. You've kind of got the heavenly realm across here, and you can see here you've got the lamb. You can see representing Jesus pierced, and he's reading out, I presume, the Book of Life or something like that. And of course, the 4 horsemen relate to, I think it's the first 4 toots of the first 4 toots of the trumpets. So each toot creates a different rider. You've got Conquest, who's represented by the kind of crowned bowman. You've got War, who's represented by the swordsman. You've got Famine, represented by that's not a healthy horse, Panama. You can attest to.
Oh no. If you got a horse looking like that, you may want to take it to a vet. That's what I'll say.
And of course, you've got the pale horse at the end here, representing death here. And you can see, obviously, there's a large part of Revelation which talks about Gog and Magog coming to fight, and that's Gog and Magog represents the whole nations, all the nations on the earth. So you've got this kind of epic battle going across here. So again, like I said, you've got the heavenly realm. You've got angels appearing, but they're all kind of like out of focus. You can't see their faces. They're kind of mere observers. They're kind of passively looking on. And obviously, the kind of 4 horsemen themselves are pretty horrific. I like how their horses each represent them. They brought the personality of the horses into it. You've kind of got Conquest, who is striding, what's the fastest horse speed again? Cantering.
Gallop is the fastest.
Oh, there you go, gallop. Is it maybe War's galloping more, but he's certainly getting. Like War seems a bit like a wild horse. Famine looks basically dead, and Death is just this like horrific, almost
ghostly.
Ghostly. There's also something like, I don't know, monstrous about that horse head as well. I don't know. There's something not right about it. And then the figures themselves are brilliant as well. You've got this.
The horse of Conquest just looks insane. It's the kind of mad strength, I suppose, of that character, as opposed to the sort of the weakness of the last 2, and the kind of martial spirit of Wars.
Yeah. I like Conquest. He's doing the Parthian shot. He's turned behind him, and that itself has got very, very important Byzantine, like symbolic meaning to it. He's got the kind of leopard. It's not a saddle. What do we call it? When you just have is it riding bareback? Was it? What's
that would
it
just Well, that would just be without stirrups. I mean, these being kind of ethereal, kind of gods in a sense. They don't really need that.
Yeah.
And then there's no reins either.
No.
Yeah, that's true. Yes, yeah, that's a good point actually. And then obviously, I just love War, who's just in a loincloth with a double-handed sword. And again, another ginger. This is some strong ginger hate tonight. Famine's quite good.
You're going to get a strike for that. You're going to get a strike for hate.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be angry ginger German out there that I know.
Oh yes,
furiously reporting this stream as we speak. Famine's quite interesting because he gets introduced by I think John describes like a conversation in the market where someone's trying to buy some grain for like loads of money basically, and you can see him. He's got the weighing scales here, showing that like food becomes mega expensive at the time of famine. And then I thought that obviously death as a skeleton is pretty. What I like about him is he's sort of wrapped up. He's sort of swaddled, which is kind of like represents the death
shroud.
body. Yeah. So I mean that's pretty standard. But what we've got here is this hellish battle for like last battle going on down here. There is a baleful, eclipse going on, giving this kind of red. Half sun. The battle's so savage. You've got like a man eating another man here. You've got king fighting king. You've got all of these rulers collapsed. The columns of civilization are falling down.
The apocalypse.
It is literally the apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just a very powerful work and pretty horrible basically, but.
Of course, we haven't really talked about the at the top of the painting, with the rainbow of God. Would that be the lamb there at the top, the Lamb of God?
Yeah, that represents Jesus basically. You can see 'cause he's pierced, pierced lamb, and the lamb represents Jesus in Revelations as well. So they specifically reference him. I mean, the use of the rainbow is interesting because that is obviously reference to the flood and God promising never to wipe out the whole of humanity again. Although the whole of humanity is not wiped out in Revelation, of course, because there's still a set number of people that survive that. So it's not a total wipeout. So maybe that's why he's put it in there. So that is a very niche thought. In the work. I've just got one other Kuznetsov painting, and this is. I do apologise. This was the highest resolution version I could find, and I took a photo from my book, and it wasn't good at all. But this is Michael and the battle between the angels and demons. Now, there's a really good Bruegel. I think Bruegel does a painting of that battle.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so it's Saint Michael. Yes, Michael the angel fighting the demons, casting the demons out. Yeah.
Yeah, and Bruegel's
that's
version
in Brussels.
Yeah, Bruegel's version is kind of like this, like horrific and freaky fight between. I don't know, these like super skinny, long-legged angels and horrifically disgusting, nasty creatures that are demons here. But it's quite an even fight. But I quite like this painting here. So you can see here Michael as at the front of the army. He's dressed in the Byzantine style here. You can see his Byzantine cuirass, the wrapped bound feet. And again, the lance, which is a classic iconic figure. All the angels are kind of floating in the night sky, and you can see here this is the lance from God firing down, and you can this serpent across here actually represents the red dragon, aka Satan. So again, he's kind of represented in a number of ways. Obviously, someone like William Blake does quite like a good version, and you can see here all the demons are just being absolutely destroyed by the angels. So it's quite different to Bruegel's work, where Bruegel's is like dynamic and there's this kind of evenness, while this is St. Michael just like absolutely dunking on the demons there. Okay, so I've got another guy, just another two, and then we'll switch over again. And this is a guy called Nestorov. And what's interesting about him is that he's very much got more of this realism element to him. And this is a kind of a Russian landscape, and you can see here this is a kind of imagining of Jesus kind of arriving in Russia. But the this is just to give a bit of a flavour as to kind of stuff that he did. But I think one of his best works is this, which is I think it's called like A Young Boy Leaves Home, and
Right.
this was done in 1918. So Nesterov comes from like a patriotic merchant family, studied in Moscow. Again, did loads of cathedral work, but interestingly, during the kind of time of the Russian revolutions, because there's obviously multiple ones before the October one, he joined the Union of the Russian People, which was described. I loved how like Wikipedia put it down as an extreme right-wing czarist group.
Proto-fascist, yeah, they always say.
Yeah, I mean extreme right-wing.
I think that tells you more about the editors on Wikipedia than anything else.
Well, I was going to say, extreme right-wing on Wikipedia is basically like Conservative Party today, isn't it? So
Union of Russian People was very based. I've done quite a lot of reading on them.
That's interesting. Can you say much about them at all?
So they were an attempt to co-opt the kind of. So essentially, from the point of view of Russian conservatives and reactionaries, around that time period, during the reign of Nicholas II, basically they can see that the more radical liberals and communists and anarchists of all stripes are very much a minority that is trying to mobilize mass support, and they realize very quickly that the masses themselves, and you have to remember that Russia at this time is still quite feudal. The masses themselves are extremely orthodox and highly protective of their way of life. So the Union of the Russian People is created to bring together all the various sort of people that feel this kind of anger that these radicals are trying to take over their country, and kind of literally fight the revolutionaries man for man, whether it be in parliament or on the streets. So that's basically what it was. It was run by nobles and politicians, and it had hundreds of thousands of followers. It ran branches everywhere, and for a very long time, it was basically the public face of the reactionary front of Russia, and they were sort of at various times loosely and sometimes more closely linked to a paramilitary organization called the Black Hundreds, which was, again, this kind of it was as I said, it was a paramilitary that went out into the streets to fight revolutionaries man for man, basically.
That's pretty hardcore. Like you get the like, again, from all of his works, he is like mega orthodox. I mean, he's literally depicting Jesus in Russia and stuff. So I'm not that surprised. But I think this painting's actually, it doesn't seem very symbolistic on the outset, but there's some really interesting things going on here. But I think this is, again, one of the kind of most reactionary paintings of the Russian Silver Age. I've looked up its name properly because it's worth talking about. It's called In Rus, the Soul of the People. And okay, so I'm just going to caveat this by saying that this is my interpretation of it, and I haven't heard it from a professional. But we're obviously kind of seeing a scene of a small child leaving what looks to be in the background some kind of settlement, and obviously based on the name of the painting, this represents the kind of soul of the Russian people. Now, behind little Russia, I mean, he's pretty skinny already, and head shaved, but he's in traditional garb still. So I wonder if that kind of represents, he is still certainly in the clothes of tradition, but he's moved away from something. Now, the second important scene is this little group across here. Now, obviously, there's this large group of people you can see, but I think they're invisible to everyone. These guys are ghosts and spirits and ideas and meanings. But what we've got here is three peasants, and peasant women, and what's described as the holy fool. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with this archetype in Russian Russian art, but it's kind of like a holy man that is sort of a little bit insane. He goes around almost like John the Baptist, kind of living off honey and locust and stuff.
Yeah.
And the three peasant women can't see this huge hubbub of people behind them at all. They're sort of missing out on this. But the holy fool can sort of feel something. He's not looking at them directly, but he's looking up at God. But he can sense that something's wrong. So I almost kind of like think that this little section here is sort of like reality, and this is kind of like the kind of invisible faces. Now, if you see this kind of huge group, you've got figures like, I don't know if you can guess who this is across here.
Would that be the Tsar?
Yeah, or I think specifically
or the Patriarch.
Ivan the Terrible. There's quite a famous painting.
Oh, okay, yes, right.
Famous painting of Venetsov, and actually, oh my goodness, there was a film adaptation of Ivan as well. He kind of looks like that. By
that was the one that Stalin commissioned, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's some interesting Stalin facts after this, but yeah, you've got that kind of a patriarchal figure as well here. You've kind of got traditional iconography, Jesus. You kind of got soldiers as well, dressed in First World War garb. You can see, doctors,
Is that
people. Sorry,
Dostoevsky there? Do you think that character in the hidden? He's just stood with the beard behind the woman in the black cloak. Him there.
It could be, because what I think this is across here, it is traditional Russia. Represented across here. It is hierarchy represented by the Tsar. It is history. It is writing. It is the sacrifice of soldiers. And at the center is Jesus here. And you can see here the icon's face has almost turned to black. You can't even see it. Everyone's down.
Icon.
Yeah, everyone's downcast. But it shows that ancientness, but it also shows kind of like how the soul of the people has rejected it. So what I'm summarizing is basically this is Russia, and they're moving away from the past, and they're going on to this new future. Now, what is that future? I don't know if you can see here in the background. You've got a river with two sailboats, but almost kind of parallel to
Steam
Russia
tug.
Is a steam tug. It is modernity. It's technology, and Russia's almost sort of looking up to it as he's going off the distance. So I think this is a really interesting, look. This is a warning sign to the people of Russia that they're moving away from the past and everything they looked at. And then at the center, the only person, the previous Tsars looking at they're the only people who've got the boldness enough to look at the viewer directly to say, is this the future you want?
Yeah, I think that's a good interpretation.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're not your traditional, not traditional, you're not your standard symbolic work. But I thought with a kind of the ghost horde on the right hand side, we'll need to kind of confirm whether that is what's his name?
Dostoevsky.
Yeah. Cool. I have one other Russian, but I don't know if we want to switch across to Munch now. Otherwise, I'll be talking for tons, for too much in a row.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll go into Munch. So Edward Munch, I'll just give you.
So just on the pronunciation here, I've always called it Munch, but is Munch?
No, it's definitely Munch. Yeah, so Edward Munch, born, I think it was either in or just outside Kristiansund, which was the name of Oslo at the time. They changed. This was when they were part of what was this? Because at one time I think they were controlled by Sweden, another time they were controlled by Denmark.
Mhm.
This is when they were controlled by Denmark. Then they got their independence right at the end of the 19th century. So Munch was born in 1863, trained in Oslo, then went to Paris. Spent a lot of time also in Berlin. Actually, did some of his best work in Berlin before returning to his native Norway. And he died in 1944. So he died just before the end of the Nazi occupation. So the Dance of Life was this was like a project that he conceived of. It would be like a symbolic representation of everyone's life. So it would be a stage of birth, of growing up. Then there would be courtship and marriage, and then there would also be stages of deceit and jealousy and despair. Then there would be parenthood, and then old age and death. So, but these were, I think it was quite a broad and extensive series, which did change. It wasn't an actual specific group of paintings. He did do a version that was sort of that was displayed, and then he did sort of variations and so on. But he never really settled the order, and he never settled what exactly was in it. But here we have the Dance of Life. So this is courtship. So this is a typical scene set in the fjords of Norway. So a lot of his paintings are set on the coast. I mean, most of Norway is only settled on the coast because the inland is very mountainous and relatively inhospitable, and it's also difficult to grow stuff there. So you tended to live on the coast. Munch's background was he had a whole series of relatives who died of tuberculosis, because tuberculosis is a deficiency disease, and the Norwegians actually were an extremely poor nation. So they suffered especially from deficiency. They didn't have good diets. They didn't have much money. And that's why quite a large number of them emigrated to America. So here we have a scene on the fjord. The typical scenes, we've got the sun giving a sort of characteristic eye-shaped reflection on the sea. Mm-hmm. And we have characters dancing here. And remember, of course, you've got the long night, the long day of the summer at such a northerly latitude. So what you have is these sort of summer nights that are just are not really nights at all. They're just sort of, they become dim, but the sun never really entirely sets. So you have these sort of long parties that go on late into the night. And so this is sort of a scene where the sun is setting, but this could be very late. This could be sort of practically at midnight.
So, sorry. No, it's all right. Well, I was going to ask, because would either of you two know how exactly this style of painting came about in this period?
Yes, I can tell you that this is it's related. It's called le Cloisonniste style. The Cloisonnism is basically where you do. You draw a design with very hard outlines, and then you fill in the colors with enamel, and then you bake it, you cook it, which fixes the enamel in place. It's also related to stained glass. So this was a style that Gauguin developed in the the 1880s alongside Émile Bernard. Van Gogh was a famous user of this style. So it's having a very strong outline, having also a rounded outline, simple color, not too much blending of color, and you have a great emphasis on drawing. So that's how you get this style.
Right.
So this is a development of post-impressionism.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it kind of gives it that kind of like liquid property, doesn't it? It feels very kind of fluid or dreamlike with all of his works, doesn't it? So that kind of works quite well. Just, it's for that kind of symbolic nature. But I guess you've got your kind of three major groups here: the three stages, the kind of young woman at the kind of the flower of her youth, her meeting a man and then her widowed.
Yes. Yeah, so you've got the three stages in this one painting. So you had different stages in different paintings, but he's also very fond of putting different stages in one painting. As I think, I don't know, I can't remember what we've got lined up, but there are other ones that do that.
And just in terms of, because I'm pretty sure he has quite a tough time with women as well, doesn't he?
Yes, spectacularly bad. So he has lots of bad affairs. He had an unhappy affair with I think an Irish actress, I think. Then he had an affair that was so bad that he actually got into an argument, and she shot off the end of one of his fingers with a pistol. So that's a pretty bad affair. And he did I think he did a self-portrait of himself smoking a cigarette. I think I'm not sure if that was before or after the injury, but he lost part of a finger. And he died unmarried. He never actually married. He had quite some success with women because he was fantastically handsome and very charismatic, but he tended to choose unsuitable women, and he didn't have terribly happy love affairs. Although I think he could have been quite a rake, and he could have got himself quite a catch. But I think he had sort of inner demons, shall we say?
Yeah, it's just interesting because again, like, this is obviously quite kind of female focused, isn't it? This piece with obviously the man dies or is gone or something. So I just wondered if that played a part of it.
Well, he's very interested in the sort of the late 19th century business of the femme fatale, of the dangerous woman, of the woman who saps the man's power and energy. So the idea of the vampire, one of his famous paintings is of a woman holding a man, and she's basically, and it's called the vampire, and she's essentially sucking the life out of him. So he felt very much that he didn't have the independence necessary to resist the lures of women. So women are very often free. Actually, I think women are probably more frequent subjects for him than others. And of course, remember, this is the time when Strindberg and Ibsen were doing lots of plays about sort of, the battle of the sexes and so forth.
Yeah.
So this was a very common subject.
Or something. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
I just wanted a little shout out to this guy. That's basically me at the dance there, just hunchbacked freak trying to go in for the kiss there.
There needs to be an instructional video telling you not to do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Blonde trainee there.
Yeah.
That's cool. Oh, this is the vampire.
So here we have the vampire. So this is 1893. So he Munch goes to Paris. He studies Impressionism. He sort of masters Impressionism and goes into Post-Impressionism. Interestingly enough, he was in Paris at exactly the same time as Vincent van Gogh, but we don't think that they ever met. In fact, if they did meet, then with Munch, who died in 1944, is certain to have mentioned meeting Van Gogh, because he was very influenced by Van Gogh, by the very strong colors, by the strong, vigorous brushwork, by the idea of a painting conveying the essence of the feeling of the artist and wanting to touch the feeling and wanting to evoke feeling in the viewer, the emotional connection, which is essentially the basis for Expressionism. So here we have an example of a battle of the sexes, symbolized here in these sort of, he's got these terrific tableaux. He's got a very wonderful way of summarizing an emotional or psychological situation in a very simple image. So here you have the woman strong. She's supposedly comforting the man, but the title suggests that she's actually draining his life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I quite like a couple of things here. For example, the man's face is kind of been blurred out, so it's kind of like entering this, oblivious state. and then again, just the kind of way the kind of brush strokes are pretty heavy, but also there's a lot of blending, so everything falls into each other. So it's almost like you're in some kind of I know he's kind of like he's got a lack of blood, so he can't really tell what's going on. And there's like an envelopment as well, just like her hair just falling down upon him over his head. She's just like totally, the tendrils are fully wrapped over.
Yeah, I think the Irish actress had red hair. So there you go. This is another one of your.
This is it. I mean, is this the red-haired actress again? I'm wondering. I was thinking
this might be, yes, because this was obviously a very powerful thing for him, and it was he was sort of he coded various people into his paintings. So if you go into depth, you can actually work out who's who.
Yeah, I mean, something like the red dress as well. You know, the Scarlet Woman has connotations as well. And maybe it's kind of like
this is sexual. So this carnality, and you've got innocence on the left, and then you've got a widowhood on the right.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if this is a bit of like a middle finger to her as well, just kind of like you've been widowed now because you've lost me, kind of thing.
Oh dear, yeah.
I mean, I think that the police would come knock on his door, asking him about his hate crime of misogyny. If he lived in Britain today.
Yeah. Okay.
And so here is another one. So as I said, tuberculosis was rife. I think at least one of his sisters, I think his mother died of tuberculosis, and I think one of his sisters died of tuberculosis. So here we have a painting. I think this is from the Tate. Just get this.
I can go back then. Yeah, it was Tate.
So this is Tate Modern. So this is 1907. This is a slightly later version. So the brushwork has become a little bit crude at this stage. I think this is a bit forceful. I slightly like the earlier ones. There's a brilliant print of this subject where it's just the head against the pillow. So this is a child dying of tuberculosis. And she's set against this white pillow, facing the light. And we have the grieving sister or the grieving mother trying to comfort her. And this was a common scene. So deathbed scenes, of course, were very common, particularly in Victorian painting, because they were, a lot of people were dying, children were dying. Obviously, in Norway, this was a big problem with tuberculosis. And this was something that Munch himself saw. I think he saw that one of his sisters die, and I think his mother also die in the family home. There was no treatment. Of course, there's no treatment for tuberculosis. There's only high altitude cure. Well, not cures, but they're basically to slow things down at this stage. You would go to high altitude sanatoria, which have lots of sunlight, lots of clean, bright air, and special diets and stuff, and that would slow tuberculosis down, but it didn't generally cure it. Tuberculosis was cured by the advent of antibiotics. So here we have a typical deathbed scene, but it's been imbued with this sort of febrile energy in the sort of rich, gloopy brushwork and strong colours.
Mm-hmm.
I was almost thinking, because again, there's that kind of strong verticalism with the brushwork on this side, so it's almost kind of like, prophetic fallacy. Your feelings become the weather. It's like the brushstrokes are representing the kind of sadness and downness. But I think this is kind of almost triumph. I don't know how to describe it as triumphal, but maybe hopeful, or there's a kind of warmth and strength. Again, the pillow illuminating her as this kind of like iconic figure. She's got her back up. She looks more stoic and strong than you might think for someone, say.
Yeah. So I mean, more. I mean, with a degree of dignity, I would say, pitiful but dignified.
Yeah, I think definitely kind of anemic and ill, but again, that dignity is a good way. And again, there's the kind of hint of the window again, potentially healing or the next life or something. Do you know what I'm saying? I think there's a little hint at whatever's next.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is the death of Mara, 1907.
This is a very interesting one.
And so, of course, you'll know about Marat, which is the French revolutionary who was killed by Charlotte Corday, I think. Corday, yes, Corday. So she went to see him with. I think actually we've done this in an earlier stream when we did like political art, maybe the second political art stream.
I think so.
We talked about David's painting of the death of Marat. So Marat was in his bath, and he was Charlotte Corday stabbed him with a knife as she was handing him a list of supposed traitors that were counter-revolutionaries. So here we have Munch himself. Munch had at one stage a moustache. The face is very similar to Munch's, with a very quite strong jaw, and that's his figure as well, because he did also paint himself nude. So this is a symbol. So this is Munch as Marat evoking Christ, laid on a bed with blood from the gunshot, because he'd been shot in the hand. He loses part of a finger, and here we have the culprit standing facing us with a curious still life on the right, which I don't quite understand. But I mean, it evokes either a hotel room or a domestic room. This is the scene of a crime, and the man has been the victim, and the woman is the victor.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think the first thing I'd comment on is the kind of the flattening of perception, or that there's a certain warping of it. So again, you've got the kind of woman who's sort of almost sitting outside of the normal perspective. Again, the table's almost upturned, and then the bed's relatively kind of normally laid out. But again, it kind of gives it that disjointed, nightmarish quality. It's almost like he's kind of dreaming about Marat as himself. I thought it was interesting around the allusions to Christ there as well, because again, he's obviously, now I didn't see it at first, but it's obviously that he's kind of laid out as Christ.
So it's like a deposition.
Yeah. Do you think he had a bit of a Christ complex or something? Like
I think he thought very highly of himself, but I think he was also very critical. So I don't think he regarded himself as perfect, but I think because he felt things very strongly, he felt like he was a good conduit to talk about all aspects of human life, because he was particularly strong and quite sensitive. He was also very proud. He became very isolated towards the end of his life. That he lived alone, but he had a housekeeper and he had models that came in sometimes. But there is there's a very haunting painting. I think maybe if we could talk about Munch again, would be good, because there's so much to say about him. There's a terrific portrait of himself, self-portrait of himself in his own house, and he looks like a ghost, and it's called The Wanderer, and he's just sort of leaning in, looking at you, and it's quite a haunting image. And it evokes the loneliness of him rattling around in his big house, surrounded by all his paintings.
There's something very just unsettling about the whole thing, isn't there? Let's be honest with you. It's kind of like, yeah. There's also like I don't know if it's intentional or whatever, but she looks like she's got one shadow here and then a second one there. So there's that kind of creepiness about it. I'm intrigued by the table, because it's obviously so specific, but maybe it's just pure.
Maybe I think maybe it's just to fill in the space, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you've got this area of nothingness, and you do really need something to balance it off. And also you've got sort of purples and pinks and so on, that balances off the whites and the blues on the other side. And of course, this is another painting of Battle of the Sexes, quite literally Battle of the Sexes.
Yeah. It's worth mentioning the yellow a second, because you've obviously got like this, what could be a fruit, but it sort of looks like it's covered on her body, but it's also like smeared upon the forehead or something as some kind of like victory ritual or something like that.
Well, I way I see it is this comes from Impressionism, because part of Impressionism that he would have learnt while he was studying in Paris in the sort of 1887, I think 1888, just when Van Gogh was there. So one of the things about Impressionism that you'll find that they were very good on light and color, and they were particularly interested in reflective color. So if you hold up your pale hand, assuming you're a white person, and you hold up your pale hand to a card that's covered in red, you'll see your hand reflects red. And if you do this with yellow, it will reflect yellow and so forth. So it's really interesting that actually you put a white object in any sort of space and it's never actually pure white. It actually reflects a little bit of the adjacent color. And this was something that the Impressionists were very keen on, very interested on. And this is something that he picks up. And this is what he's using. He's now using this in a sort of a Renoir-esque way to enliven the figure, the blues, to offset the blues, because otherwise it becomes very blue and very dim, and he's added this yellow to liven it up. You also see that very much in the paintings of Pierre Bonnard as well.
Right.
Well, one last thing I'll say this is there is something of the kind of like post-coital as well, where he's kind of laid out and spent. He's kind of used up. Sorry to be so vulgar, but
and there's all that blood around. So
well, but I think there is sort of allusion to that again, and that's almost kind of like the victory that she has over him. I wonder if she's still in his head or whatever, or they got back together after they broke up or something. So
now that you mention it, that does seem quite an obvious angle to take. I mean, I know this is the title is it German?
The Death of Marat. That's not necessarily significant. He was in Germany at the time.
Well, no, but I mean, because the French refer to the male orgasm as le petit mort.
Yeah.
So I mean, there is that aspect to it. He's kind of, as you said, spent and laid out, and his mind is once again clear, and he can see her for what she really is for that brief moment.
Yeah. Oh, we've got some comments in the chat. Hello, Mr. Valdez, and hello, Rokas M. He says yellow could be a hint of the disease that Marat had, because yes, as you may remember, Marat had a terrible skin disease because he contracted while living in the sewers of Paris. As he was a revolutionary, he was hiding in the Paris sewers, and he got a terrible skin disease, which meant that he had to, which not surprising. So he had to bathe himself, which is why he spent so much time in the bath, and that's why Corday met him in the bath. So yeah,
yes,
it's possible.
It was quite horrible. His skin was literally peeling off. Most of the time.
It's funny you mentioned the sewers, because I immediately thought this was a rat across here, but that's just me with the tail coming out. But anyway, last munch. Ooh.
Okay, so the last one is Alma Mater. So this is Mother. Oh, sorry, by the way, the death of Marat. If it was 1907, then he was back in Norway by this stage. So this is Alma Mater. This is well and truly in his Norwegian period. Obviously, during the First World War, there was no sort of travel. There was no. You didn't travel for pleasure, and especially into Germany, because obviously that was a war zone. Norway was neutral during the First World War.
Mm-hmm.
So Alma Mater. So this is a painting I believe that he made for, I think it's for Oslo University, I think. So he got some commissions, but he was the Norwegians kind of, I think, have rather mixed feelings about Munch during his life. They were kind of proud of him, but he'd caused lots of scandals. His exhibition in Berlin in the sort of end of the 1890s caused a huge scandal, or maybe it was 1900, caused a huge scandal, and it was basically something that excited so much controversy that it basically sparked the Expressionist movement. So he was seen as sort of as a wild person, as an extremist, as someone who was hanging around with degenerates and decadents, and the group he was hanging around with in Berlin were very decadent indeed. They were taking lots of drugs, they were having affairs, they were writing about crazy sort of satanic stuff, and they were supporting socialism and anarchism and so forth. I'm not sure he believed in any of that very much. I think he was always very interested in life and experiences, but he wasn't a particularly political artist.
No.
You sound like a mother whose child's been arrested. He was a good boy. He was
a good boy before he fell in with those Berlin decadents.
Those damn artists.
Yeah. So the Norwegians had sort of mixed feelings. They were proud that he was doing well, but they wished he'd been slightly more polite and slightly more, genteel. So anyway, he was commissioned to do a whole series of murals at the end of his life. This isn't at the end of his life. This was in a period of relative calmness, because he had a breakdown and went to Copenhagen for electroconvulsive therapy. He was actually one of the first people to have this. And this did seem to sort him out to a degree. He returned to Norway, so he was living in Norway now, and he painted this series of murals. And this is obviously a typical symbolist subject. So this is motherhood, this is maternity. Very similar to an artist called Ferdinand Hodler, who was working at the same time, where you have this sort of wide expanses, mountain views, quite calm, quite restful. I don't think it's an especially good painting, but I think it's a good example of how Munch could adapt himself to symbolism in a civic context.
And he definitely had several styles he went through as well, because I've seen some of his earlier work, and it was kind of like more realist.
Yeah, well, he starts off as a realist. He's become sort of like a sort of northern realist, and then he has an impressionist phase. He has like a post-impressionist phase. He has the Cloisonnist phase. Here he is painting in this way. He had a stage where he was painting very, very roughly indeed. And of course, we haven't even talked about the Scream. We just don't have time. I think that we could say all sorts of things about Munch, but I think that this is an example of a symbolist painting, and you can see how this is similar to and dissimilar to the other civic paintings painted by the symbolists.
This is almost like a triptych again. I see it with, again, the human mother at the center, and you've got Mother Earth represented by the forests and trees on the right, and then the kind of bountiful sea on the left, which has obviously been mega important to your seabound Norwegians. So it's kind of like, in some ways, it kind of feels empty and just like what's really going on, but actually, it's kind of like a clever reference to the importance.
And of course, these sort of these arcing sandy bays are so common in Munch's other paintings as well. If you look through, you'll just see them again and again. Here it is painted in a relatively realistic manner. Yeah, so this is a typical example where it's just so general and it becomes just a sort of backdrop. And here it's slightly more realistic. So you've got like atmospheric recession, which makes the green mountains blue in the background. So that's that obviously comes from traditional painting, and this is something that he would have learnt also in Paris.
I was going to ask, what do you think the kind of young boy is playing with there?
I think maybe it's sort of his curiosity. So that would be something like sort of flowers. So that might be interest in science or love of nature, maybe.
Yeah,
so this was painted. So this was painted for So remember, this was painted for a university. So obviously, it's to do with sort of acquiring knowledge and acquiring wisdom.
Yeah, interesting. I like how she's obviously like quite fertile. She's got 3 other kids, and she's on to her 4th now. She isn't this kind of like Delville like lithe titular beauty.
Yeah. It's a really positive and optimistic portrayal for Munch. It's atypical for Munch.
I was going to say it's quite alien to associate a name like that with a painting like this.
Yeah, well, he's an extremely varied artist. I mean, I think we could do like a whole stream on him because he's just terrific.
Wearing clogs, I'm pretty sure they're Norwegian clogs. Very, very healthy. Okay. Wonderful. Do you want to say anything else about Munch at all?
No, except that he's a wonderful artist, and there's loads to talk about. And I would say, just dive in. There's much more to Munch than the Scream. Plenty to see.
Even though you said Munch about 15,000 times, I still keep saying Munch. So apologies.
Just one last thing on, I guess, sort of on this painting or the theme, I suppose. It might be interesting to sort of track through, or if anybody knows any sort of links to people that have done this, sort of tracking the portrayal of motherhood and maternity through art, I suppose.
Well, that would make a great stream in itself.
It's an interesting topic because I've been writing about femininity recently, and so yeah, if I could get some sort of visual references for it, that would be good.
So you want us to do your homework for you? Is that what you're
No,
saying?
no, not at all. I'm just thinking if there was sort of a through line.
Well,
visually.
I mean, yeah. Obviously, you could start with maternities of the Renaissance, the Madonna and Child and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could go back to the Neolithic carved Venuses. But I mean, you can. I mean, there's loads and loads of material, and it's a constant subject for art all the way from medieval period up to now.
There's a Maltese Venus that I particularly like, which is this rather rotund woman sort of reclining on a chair. I don't know if you've ever seen that before.
A Maltese Venus? No, I haven't.
You know the old joke about how do you make a Maltese cross? You poke them in the eye with a Venetian blind. How do you make a Venetian blind? You poke them in the eye with a Maltese cross.
Very good.
Venetian Venus. Anyway.
Yeah, Venetian blind. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There you go. There's the there's the figure I was talking about. It's all. It's just interesting. But I think that's a good idea. A good idea for a stream.
Yeah.
Okay. Panama, do you want to talk about some literature stuff, or I can go through my last
The interesting thing about kind of Russian symbolist literature, it's kind of, you have this unfortunate kind of effect where, like you mentioned, how there's a lag between what's happening in the West and what's happening in the East, and that is sort of made more so in literature. You have this whole school of sort of poets who want to try and use symbolist themes, but they never quite commit to it really. They sort of move around. I suppose the most clear example would be Tuchev, who is not very well known at all in the West, but is a highly quoted poet in Russia. If you've ever seen Tarkovsky's Stalker,
Yes.
he gets recited in that, and there's sort of links to his work.
Tarkovsky was the guy who did the Ivan the Terrible, and I'd forgotten who did the film. Sorry, but carry on.
That's all right. Yeah. Basically, they get onto symbolism, and then sort of 1905 comes around in the First World War, and then everything is just blown out the window. Essentially, they're kind of too late to really have a strong showing in that field. And you've got people like Dostoevsky who have a massive influence on the symbolists, but who I would not call one. He's too early to be a symbolist, really. That's all I can really say for the literary aspect of this. I mean, you have there's a woman called I think it's Zinaida Hippias, who continued writing up, and she died in 1945. She was born in 1870, I think, and remained a symbolist up until she died. But that was kind of a vestige of the world she was born into that then went away with the revolution. So yeah, it's interesting, but they never really catch on to the movement. I mean, frankly, I think that symbolism is just too kind of avant-garde and bourgeois of a movement to really take hold in the Russia of that era. Russia of the late 1800s is not Paris of the late 1800s.
Yeah. It's interesting what artistic movements they do pick up, because again, that kind of academic Orientalism that Alexander mentioned definitely permeates through. Realism makes it, but again, you don't see any kind of impressionism really at all.
No.
You do start to get like abstracts, and modernism. They've got their own. Obviously, like the Russians start to get their own movements in like the 1910s. So again, there's sort of like a breakdown in that kind of gatekeeping as they enter the 20th century. So I think it's interesting. Yeah, like even this symbolism, as you can see, is always filtered through the kind of Russian historical lens, I guess, or Christian lens.
Before we leave that subject, it's worth mentioning Knut Hamsun, who is a Norwegian author who wrote, I think it's 1890. I think that's Hunger was 1890, and he is an amazing writer. And Hunger is a fantastic book because it's about this sort of jobbing journalist who's kind of a bit of a failure. And he suffers from hunger because of poverty, and he's sort of going around, and he's basically starting to lose his mind because he's becoming so detached through hunger. And he goes into this particular situation where he gets a load of money from an editor, and he ends up giving it away, even though you're thinking, no, buy yourself some food, for God's sake, save some money. So I would really recommend Hunger by Knut Hamsun, which is an pioneering work of symbolism and modernism, and it's a fantastic read.
Sounds fascinating. I'll look into that.
Cool.
Knut Hamsun.
Yeah. So it's Knut, and it's Hamsun. I think it's with a U. I can't remember if it's a U or an E.
I'm trying to think where I've heard of Knut Hamsun.
Well, he won the Nobel. Won the Nobel Prize for Literature. He was also rather too friendly with the Nazis during the occupation.
Right.
So he kind of fell from favor in 1945 with the end of the war. But in 1890, he was a vibrant young symbolist writer who was part of the sort of dynamic scene of a newly independent, or just about to become newly independent, Norway. And he did some terrific other. I've read of some of his other books, but yeah. So he won the Nobel Peace Prize, and he was also famously anti-British for some reason. He didn't like the British.
I see.
Yeah. So Hamsun with a U. One of our commenters has written in the chat.
Right.
Interesting. Do you know why he was anti-British at all?
No, I think that there was a bit of resentment because Britain was playing sort of kingmaker. It was like the grand game. So there was a little bit of resentment towards the British regarding sort of power politics. I think that may have been it, or it may have been something else. I'm not quite sure what it was in his case.
Interesting. Okay, I'll definitely check out the book. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to go to the last person for tonight, and that is Mikhail Vrubel. Now, he's a really interesting figure in the fact that, again, he starts out as it's very similar to Nesterov and Kuznetsov in terms of his background. He literally started at the Imperial Academy, was very prestigious, top of the class, spent a lot of time I guess doing kind of Christian work, and so for the first third of his life, he was focused on doing this quite realist work, similar to Nesterov, really, but also a lot of kind of iconic and fresco work. But as he hit the kind of the middle part of his life, he started to kind of not, I would say question what he's doing, but more kind of like try and forge out a new path in his work. And a key moment was when he went to Italy, and obviously most people kind of get enthused by Raphael or Titian, but he went to Venice and was inspired by St. Mark's Basilica and the Byzantine art inside there, and began what he described as his path to being a great colorist. So obviously, there are kind of different ideals in art. There's design versus
Color, yeah. So Vasari has its disegno versus colore. So the disegno was supposedly an attribute of Florentine art, and colore was an attribute of Venice. And of course, color was seen as feminine, and drawing was seen as masculine. Drawing was seen as logical, and color was seen as emotional.
Yeah, thank you. So he definitely fell on the kind of the color side of the spectrum, and produced. He's got quite a large body of work, but I think what's interesting about him, he's painting in the from like 1990 into the 1920s. He has these kind of really, really wonderful colors that you don't see anywhere else. These kind of dual tone qualities, and also his distinctive brushwork as well. Which I mean, Alex, I'm sure you probably can reference it a little bit more, but it's not something like I've seen done in a meaningful way.
That definitely looks sort of quite faceted. So obviously that's sort of, it looks associated with mosaics, as you say. I mean, that's obviously related to Byzantine art. It could also be that he's using a palette knife. I don't know, that I can't see from this quality, but that's the sort of thing that you would apply paint with a palette knife. Something that the artists of the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists did a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good shout actually, with the kind of mosaic feature almost, where again, if you see a mosaic, you're painting, you're effectively using 4 or 5 coloured stones, but then mixing them together to create the kind of gradients and effects. So it's almost kind of quite a graphic work, and he's done something similar here. This piece itself is kind of it's called, I think it's the Demon or the Demon Dormant, created in I think it's 1895, and it's kind of supposed that because he spent all of his time, he was working on a big cathedral commission at the time, doing icons, and he was coming home and he was trying to kind of reflect the other side of kind of spiritual warfare. There's some, I do wonder if there's something of himself inside there as this kind of wistful youth looking out to the distance. The sun is setting, and he's we've seen some pretty horrific demons, and I think this is quite complementary, but there is this kind of like sadness to the figure, and there is because of the mosaic quality, there is this kind of ugliness to it. There's the kind of physicality of manhood, but then ugliness in the face, where again you've got this kind of distended nose and huge eyes.
Yeah, that definitely does look. Some of that does look applied with a palette knife. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, moving on to some of his other work. He quickly became kind of the toast of the town, and had various commissions. And obviously, one of the kind of key parts of the Russian Silver Age was the opera. And so this is actually the Swan Princess. And you can see here, this is the kind of princess. I can't remember the story exactly. Does she turn into a swan every midnight or something?
I believe so. That may be incorrect, but I think that is what happens. Yeah.
But like I think basically you can see her it mid transformation. You can see the kind of iconic headdress as well of like a Byzantine princess, and her dress kind of folding and becoming the wings of the bird as the sun sets in the distance across there. So this is kind of like an accompaniment to kind of the opera work that was going on, but again, as just like a metamorphic piece. I quite liked the kind of dress, the billows of the dress.
Yeah, she's collapsing into it almost.
Yeah, exactly. But he's it's obviously a lot less mosaic-y than this other work. You've got quite a realist hand. The face again is a bit blocky maybe, but there's a definite kind of structure. But then again, the colors are really interesting as well. It's all about purity, the whiteness, the kind of blues and greens, again dual qualities, and then contrasting to the kind of reds and oranges, contrasting. I'm not sure what this represents across here. Maybe kind of whatever civilization or the kind of city in the palace.
Mm-hmm.
That she. Now, I just absolutely love this work. This is called the Bogatyr. So this all relates to. But as part of this kind of Russian Romanticism, they looked back to Kievan Rus, where you've kind of got like the knightly tales of old. You know how like pre-Raphaelites would look at medieval subjects. The medieval Rus has these kind of like knightly heroes, but Kuznetsov has quite a famous Bogatyr. Where they're kind of dressed like as kind of quite handsome knights, but Vrubel has depicted his Bogatyr as this kind of quite rotund, wide,
absolute size of the man.
Yeah, he is an absolute unit. But I think there is like a symbolic nature to him. He is this kind of like larger than life character. Even his horse. I mean, that is a fat horse.
It's a pretty chunky horse, yeah.
It's a pretty chunk horse, but again, he's kind of wide in spirit, wide in character.
He's strong though.
It is a blockiness to him. You can see his hands on his legs. So again, he's kind of like that's like a power pose, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, the painting is kind of like, oh, it looks quite. Because it's just so dark, it's quite hard to see, but there's just lots of little depth and interesting pieces. Like there's a trio of birds at the bottom, and they're kind of fighting. Again, just the detailing on the armor is really interesting. Where again, there's birds in the armor and the work, and birds like the kind of symbolic eagle, the kind of symbols of power and hunting. And again, just the colors. It's these kind of super. Saturated, dark and grimy greens, and you got the kind of the reds pulling out. So again, maybe a bit of just a little hint of red in the eyes of the swollen horse. So it's almost comedic, but I quite like it as like a dreamlike fantasy piece.
Yeah.
This is slightly further on in his life. So basically, he has quite a tough time. His father comes ill. I think he loses his son as well. And this is called like the fallen demon. So again, he keeps coming back to demons, and you've kind of got this. You mentioned kind of the. I've forgotten how to say it again. I'm going to say Munch. I'm just going to say it. The Munch landscape. Again, like the mountains to Vrubel are similar, and he's got this this is very graphic. It's all been kind of refined down to just 3 colors representing it, and you've got this demon who has lost his wings, descended to earth. You can see these are like peacock feathers as part of his wings, which is again traditional in some Byzantine versions. You can see that the former angel was dressed in this fine robe with gold and like blue silk, and it's been stripped from his body, and you're left with this character who's kind of like folded in half almost. Contort is a great way of saying it. Like sort of lithe and stretched out, but then there's this pain and disgust, and just look at the kind of dark bags under the eyes. Again, his technique is just so blocky that you lose a lot of the detail, but it lets you kind of fill in the detail in your mind. But again, that neck position, a human couldn't survive it. Only a demon could survive being his head moved at 45 degrees. But again, just look at the beautiful colors here. You've kind of got the gold balance with the cobalt blue, or Alex, I'm sure you can tell me the exact shade of.
That looks like smalt blue, which is slightly sootier and grainier. Yeah.
Royal smalt, yes.
Yeah.
And then like the pink coming in here, so it's an interesting triad. But it's sort of similar to his other demon work. He just loves the blue is like super important in Byzantine work, obviously, but purple is as well. Purple often is represented is kind of like but Byzantine depictions of the Virgin are here in a purple robe as opposed to the Catholic blue robe. So there's that kind of regal, and obviously the kind of only the there's this whole idea of
the sumptuary laws.
Yes, exactly. There's this whole idea of the purple being important to the emperor of Byzantium, where only the sons born in the purple room, they had this kind of entire room made of porphyry with the kind of purple dyed. So purple is the kind of royal color, and it's the royalty of nature in the background. But again, this is quite a dark and disturbing. I do wonder what's going on in the heads in a lot of these artists, but it's quite an interesting piece.
I think this is worth comparing to the art of Gustav Klimt at this stage.
Yes, that's true. Because again, he uses a lot of gold and purples. I think this was again post Klimt, so.
That's a big subject, but the sort of the Gustav Klimt and the Secession and Egon Schiele and stuff. That's a very interesting subject.
Yeah, again, that'd be a great little mini stream on on that maybe. And then just a last work, which is his kind of 6-winged seraph. So again, the seraphs are noted as a different kind of angel, wings that would cover their feet, their body and their eyes, I think, at some point. So that's why they have 3 sets of wings to cover those 3 different areas. But again, you can kind of see this again like a angelic figure with a elongated, definitely non-human neck. But the hair is in the Byzantine style, and again the gold's coming through. But it's almost kind of quite abstract at this point. Those kind of facets sort of merging together to create a very, there's almost no boundaries between the different areas. It's just these kind of blocks of colours merged together. But I just wanted to kind of finish up, like there's sort of no one like Vrubel, and I don't think he is was that favourable by the Soviets. Something I missed out on Nesterov. In fact, all of them suffer badly under Lenin. Like Nesterov literally has his family killed. He's thrown into prison. However, interestingly, Nesterov wins like a Stalin art prize later on. And I think a lot of these guys sort of get rehabilitated during the kind of Stalin return to tradition, return to the good old days.
Interesting times, isn't it, for artists at that point?
I've been writing a lot about Stalinist art. I've been actually wrote a really long review for a publication called the Brazen Head, which you can find online. This will be coming out sort of in the next month or two, and it's basically looking at how the Russians went from this sort of experimental modernism, went through to social realism, and then they went to the sort of the Stalinist period of a conservative nationalism before the Khrushchev thaw, and then they go back to modernism, which carries on until the end of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine what it's like where you're literally thrown in prison 1 week and then awarded by Stalin himself the next.
Yeah.
Okay, but that is my last, Russian symbolist. Definitely worth checking out Vrubel. He's got a lot of relatively large body of work. The other guys have slightly smaller, so you can't go into as much detail, but. Hopefully that's kind of given everyone a flavour as to, Russia and what was going on there. And we heard with Munch, he's definitely someone that's kind of taking some of those symbolic ideas. I mean, Alex, just in terms of, what happens next after symbolism, I guess you got the Surrealists maybe as the kind of key, takers of the banner.
Well, it's you've got this weird, you've got this sort of weird war period where there's not much. Well, you have the sort of the call to order, which happens in sort of about 1918, 1920, where you have like the rise of traditional sort of more conservative art that sort of blends in a few aspects of modernism. Because for example, you have the futurists turning away from sort of machine art and action and dynamism, the ones that didn't get killed in the war, and they go back to this sort of, they go to the Novecento style, which was practiced during the fascist period, but it's not overtly political at all. It's sort of relatively conservative. Aspects of naivete, and then of course you've got the Surrealists who come up of course in Paris in 1924, 1926 and so forth. So it gets a bit muddled because at this stage there's a lot of abstraction and so forth. Someone mentioned in the chat, thank you for the chat, that Hamsun wasn't prosecuted for collaboration after the war by the Norwegians, because you remember that Quisling, who was actually the Norwegian premier, whose name is now synonymous with traitor, Quisling was prosecuted, might even have been executed, I don't remember, but Hamsun wasn't, because they judged him to be insane. Now, this is an interesting thing that they did with a number of other people. So, for example, if you look up the case of Ezra Pound,
that's fascinating, by the way.
If you look at Ezra Pound and Alexander Adams, I have a review where I basically summarize the situation. What happened to Ezra Pound was he was basically broadcasting in support of the fascists in Italy. Italy loses the war. He gets imprisoned by the Americans. The Americans say you committed treason. There's all sorts of jiggery-pokery, and he gets out of it. Well, he doesn't get out of it. His lawyer gets him out of it by saying, my client is insane. He didn't ask his client. He says, basically, my client is insane. Anyone who supported the fascists must have been insane. Therefore, he was insane. Therefore, you have to let him off as insane. Whereas if he'd actually been imprisoned as a political prisoner, he would have been in and out in 10 years or something, maybe 7 years. Instead, he spends most of the rest of his life in an insane asylum. Yes,
and one thing about that, of course, is that, as you pointed out, Ezra Pound was not really clinically insane. He was a pretty colourful character, especially at that stage, and he was partly made mad by the fact that he'd been held in an open air cage in the Italian sun for 3 weeks in Pisa, with nothing but like a sort of scrap of toilet paper to write on. He was able to sort of keep
no shade as well. Yeah,
no shade. He was constantly exposed to the heat and the glare. And again, I'm not a sympathizer of the Nazis at all. I find they're far too much to the left for me. But but this has to be one of the most sort of based, sort of inspiring anti-liberal things that ever happened. He arrived in America as a kind of, the number one news the number one news item in the entire country. This as America's foremost poet comes back, and he's been declared insane, and he was a fascist, and this enormously controversial person. And so he steps off the boat into America, and the first thing he does is give the fascist salute, and then say that America is the insane asylum, and then he gets taken away.
Gets taken away to St. Anne's, where he became actually fated as a poet and inspired a generation of younger poets. And then he was released and died in Venice. Someone in the chat says that Quisling was shot, which wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. And of course, then we have the word Quisling, which is come into usage. Yeah.
That's quite a dramatic end to the symbolist stream.
Yes.
Well, I mean, who is more of a symbolist than Ezra Pound, really? He carries on what the symbolists were trying to do in a very, very erratic and abstract way that perhaps they wouldn't have approved of. But that was how he started, was in symbolism and imagism and moving through, and that's how he continued to write for the rest of his life, I think, very, very prolifically.
Okay, well, I think that nicely rounds us out for tonight. I just want to say thank you very much, Alex and Panama, for taking us through the Symbolists. We haven't decided the next stream. I mean, there was talk of, what was it, Hitler's art?
Hitler's art collection.
I quite like that as an idea, but I think we'll have to go in and have a think about what that could look like.
Art collections of famous people, yeah.
But we'll be probably back in, I guess, next month at some point. Follow my Twitter account to find out when that is, and also subscribe and hit the bell. I can't believe I'm having to say this, so you can keep notified about the excellent streams that are going on. But
smash that like button.
Oh god.
And we're not looking at 500 anymore. We're looking for 1,000. When we hit 1,000, we'll do something special on the stream. Like I don't know, maybe I'll do a portrait of Saffron, and we'll do a portrait reveal on 1,000 subscribers. We want the Saffron simp bump.
Exactly. We'll each do a portrait of Saffron in a different artistic style.
I can't draw. I can't draw or paint. What are you asking me to do?
You're doing the abstract Saffron. That's my.
Or you can do the naive. You can do the naive.
Naive art. Yes.
The primitive.
What about a Saffron? What about a Saffron sonnet?
Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay.
We haven't asked Saffron about this, but
Yeah. No. Exactly. That's 1,000
we
subscribers.
want all the Saffron simps to give us a bump to get Pharaoh over 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, please do subscribe. Alex, I mean, you mentioned a few things at the start, but do you want to plug anything else that's going on?
No, just buy copies of Alexander Adams' Culture War or Alexander Adams' Iconoclasm, both available on good online websites and not so good online websites.
Can I mention your blog as well? Because
Yes.
Yeah, well, just basically, I mean, you do kind of critiques of books and just general chat about interesting art stuff as well, don't you? So
yeah, so that's www.alexanderadamsart.wordpress.com. All sorts of articles on art and literature, and I've got a recent one on decadence. So that's there. There's going to be one up on Tom Thompson, who is a Canadian painter who died under mysterious circumstances. And I will be assessing a few books that are written trying to explain his mysterious death.
That's cool. I like that. And Panama, are you going to be, I know, crushing the nationalists on another stream anytime soon, or?
I'm not sure I can be. Not sure I can be quite asked. I mean, I don't have any anything to shill for the moment. Essentially, I mean, I literally have been putting this out now for like months, saying that there'll be a video on my channel within the next week, and of course there never is. But I think there may actually be one this week coming up. That's basically it.
What's the topic? Can you? Get on the hype
train.
It
is. There are a whole bunch of it. It will either be the errors of democracy, or it will be a sort of look into a particular author, or it will be a description of the positions of the authentic reactionary, as I take them to be. Those are the three options. Haven't decided yet.
Okay, all very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we'll leave it at that. And I just want to say thank you very much to my guests one last time, and thank you very much all of the listeners. We really appreciate anyone who listens in and kind of shares it around. It's been a really enjoyable doing the research and putting this all together, and hopefully catch you guys soon.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
Thanks a lot.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.